Hello, my grots and gits. Welcome back to another super exciting episode of Happy Corporate Wargaming. Today, we're going to talk about an extremely important subject, which is how the heck do you beat the clock? Because we have to play faster. If you're going to be playing at tournaments, if you're going to be playing on TTS tournaments, one of the things that you have to learn is that you're going to have to get to the point where you can just play a little bit faster. I know I love a good 5-hour beer hammer game. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, but if you're trying to play on a more competitive level schedule, or if you're trying to get multiple games in a day, a lot of times you're just going to have to be able to play faster. And that's regardless of whether it's a tournament or whether it's just, honestly, you need to respect each other, all of your friends' time. Like, sometimes for friends, their time is valuable and it needs to be respected. So we have to be able to not take a 7-hour turn. So how do we do it, though? Because it can be a hard subject. So let's figure that one out today. First off, why do we have a clock? One, the clock actually makes the game much more fair. I don't know about you, but I have absolutely played a game where we only had 3.5 hours to play, and my opponent took about 3 hours of it. And that was nonsense. It was absolutely ridiculous. I only got to go through a movement phase and do one of my shooting and fight phases, and he took the rest of the time to do all of his turn. And at the end of it, he wanted to call it a draw. I'm like, dude, no way, 0 chance. So this happens in tournaments, this happens in private play, and it's just not respectful and it's not fair at all. So clocks make the game fair. 2, it keeps the game from stalling, which means it's not going to be super boring. Sometimes when you're just sitting there and your opponent's taking 3 hours to do one movement phase, heck, dude, you can piss off and you can go grab a burger. You can hop on Google. The game gets boring at that point in time. So having the clock engaged keeps the game moving. There is plenty of time. You don't actually have to worry about it. So what is the standard time on the clock for like a tournament setting? Most tournaments are booked for roughly 3-hour rounds. Sometimes they'll be 3-hour, 15-minute rounds, like we're doing in our personal TTS tournament. But typically it's about 3 hours. So each person will get about 1.5 hours to play. So what is the clock etiquette? And I figured we'd take the distinguished gentleman of the frog here to help teach us the etiquette for a clock. Well, typically, you're going to spend roughly 10 minutes of time going over your pre-game stuff. At most tournaments I go to, you're generally speaking getting roughly that 3-hour, 15-minute time limit for a game, so 15 minutes to get the board set up. And then it's recommended, and I certainly recommend this, to take roughly 10 minutes total to go ahead and explain to each other how your list work. So for example, if I am playing Grey Knights, one of the things I'll explain how my stratagems work, and I'll explain interactions with my stratagems and other rules. So I'll tell my opponent, hey, I have a stratagem called Mist of Deimos. So when you move within 9 inches of these models, I can actually pick them up and put them back in reserves. And just remember, since it's in reserves, I can then rapid ingress that same unit in the same turn. So I like to tell my opponent all these things that I can do. I don't tell them what I'm going to do. I tell them what I can do. I never, ever, ever want to win a game because of a lack of knowledge from my opponent. I would like to outskill my opponent, but not out-knowledge my opponent necessarily. So, generally speaking, if you have 10 minutes to go over your pregame stuff and we have a 3-hour clock, each person's going to start the game at roughly 1 hour and 25 minutes. Whenever you're thinking, when you're moving, when you're rolling the dice, that clock is on you. Whenever you're done and it's time for your opponent to do things, you click the chess clock. I actually bring a chess clock with me to the tournaments, and you just click it and the time passes over to your opponent. Now, this is something that's really important for me to state. The clock is not a weapon. I do not click the clock over for my opponent to roll a save. That's going to take him 1.5 seconds, and it's going to take him even longer than 1.5 seconds just to pass the clock back to me. I don't do that. When it's my fight phase, I'm rolling. It's essentially I'm keeping it generally on me. Now, if my opponent is stopping to think, or they're stopping to think about whether they want to use stratagems or they want to do a reactive movement, I will pass the clock over to them for that, but not typically just a general armor save. And I would expect my opponent to extend the same courtesy to me. So if I'm just rolling an armor save, I would expect them not to pass it over to me. Now, if they start doing that, I'll just have the brief conversation and be like, hey, are we going to pass it over for every 1 second interaction? Or is that what we're doing here? And if they say yes, then all right, that's what we're doing. But typically speaking, no one's going to be that guy. The only time for saves that I'm really passing it over is if they have like 27 saves, or if they're mixed with Feel No Pains. I will click it over to opponents for mixed with Feel No Pains, because the second you add Feel No Pains into the mix, that really can add a huge amount of time to the clock. So that is your clock etiquette. What are the initial steps to getting faster? Oh my, it looks like I have a little error here with my PowerPoint. Oh well, it was a cool picture of some super fast Orcs and speed freaks. It happens. Sorry about that, guys. Anyway, steps to getting faster. First thing that you need to do is you need to identify your game plan. So at the beginning of the game, for me, at the beginning of my deployment even, I'll just look and I'll go, okay, what do I need to do? What do I need to accomplish so that I win this game? And I'll lay out the things I need to do. I'll give you a good example when I'm using my Custodes. The game plan essentially never changes. There are times when they change, but very rarely. So with my Custodes, my game plan is going to be, I need to hold 2 objectives for the entire game. I need to maximize my primary, and then I need to expend resources to deny my opponent primary. Because my opponent is, generally speaking, I'm not going to be able to stop them from scoring secondaries. So my goal is to score maximum primary, deny them as much primary as possible, and then I'm going to score 7 out of 16 secondaries that are scored simply by holding primary objectives. And that is the way I'm going to win the game. So once you identify your game plan, it becomes very, very simple to make the next steps into making you a much faster player. Now, every single round, you're going to need to identify the steps that are required to execute your game plan for that round. So if I'm playing Custodes and I know I need to hold primary, I need to deny it to my opponent, and I need to score the secondaries that you can score just by holding primary. Well, what if I draw area denial and I draw a tempting target? Well, it's no problem. I know where I need to move that turn because I need to score those secondaries while holding primary. Now, if scoring those secondaries will take me away from scoring my game plan, immediately, like say I draw investigate signals, and I know going backwards to draw investigate signals is going to stop me from accomplishing my game plan, I spend 0 time thinking about investigate signals, and I just discard it for CP at the end of the turn. Because it goes against my game plan, which is going to ruin my chances of winning said game. So now that I've identified in this turn exactly what I need to accomplish to further my game plan, now it makes my movement phase, my shooting phase, and my fighting phase very, very simple. Let's say that I need to move my models, because it turns out, shock, when you play 40k, you need to move your freaking models. Well, if I am moving my models up, and in my head I'm going, okay, why am I moving them here? I'm moving them here so that next turn they will be able to advance out into the middle and kill my opponent. Perfect. But am I trying to... So I asked myself that question. Why am I moving my model here? I don't want them to be seen by my opponent this turn, so they can't shoot me. And the next turn, I want to be able to move out from behind cover and make the charge. Well, if my model is touching the ruins, for example, I've already answered the question of, does this progress my goal for my game plan? Well, it doesn't, right? Because my model is touching the ruin. Then suddenly my opponent is able to see them, which means I'm not going to be able to jump them out next turn and kill my opponent because they're going to be able to see me. So the second I ask myself the question, what is my purpose of moving them here? I notice that they're touching the ruin, which doesn't meet my plan, which means I don't make that mistake, which means I don't have to agonize over not making mistakes. You see how it works? So ask yourself every time you do any single action, how does this further your game plan? If it doesn't further your game plan, you don't do the action. Trust me, this sounds like a lot. And maybe the first once or twice that you try it, it will make you take a few more minutes. But afterwards, your gameplay is going to speed up tremendously. Dice strategies. What are some ways to make sure that you don't get bogged down in your dice? Well, one thing I really like to do is I have stacks of 20 dice when I play. I've got my green orc dice and I've got my black orc dice, and then I've got some white dice that I use generally for wound counters. So if I know that I am running in and I'm going to be hitting with a unit of 5 knobs and it's the WA phase, 5 times 4 is 20 dice. So all I need to do is pick up my green dice. I don't have to count them. So what I do is I have these stacks of green dice. If I know I need just 16 dice, all I do is pull 4 out of the green dice and I throw them. So I have them separated by color because segregation in Warhammer for dice is good. Nowhere else, but it's good for dice. It just speeds up your gameplay. You never have to take the time to, all right, I have this many dice, I have this many dice. No, I automatically know that in my green pile, I've got 20 dice. In my black pile, I've got 20 dice. So if I need 16, I just remove 4. I don't count 16 out. It will speed up your gameplay very, very dramatically. Then the next step that we can do is we look at our game plan. So, actually, I already went through this. So I went through this in a previous slide. So essentially, yeah, this is just what I was saying. You identify your game plan, you deploy to accomplish your game plan. Every turn, identify what you need to do in order to accomplish said game plan. And then anytime you make an action, ask yourself, how does it further my game plan? If it doesn't, don't waste time on it. And I have a beautiful little orc diagram here to describe that. Sorry, guys, that was a little bit of a duplicate slide there. I actually think this is a better slide. I should have done it on this one. Let's move on to the next slide. So movement phase. So this is a very, very important trick that I was taught by, I don't know, someone. but it served me extremely well. In my movement phase, I never spend any time thinking. I already have done my entire movement phase while my opponent has played in their shooting and in their fight phase. By the end of my opponent's shooting phase, if they're shooting army, I already know everything I have to do in my turn. The only thing that I need to take into consideration is if something crazy happens and he charges me with non-melee units, or if something crazy happens and I draw just crazy secondary mission objectives. Because if I'm drawing like tactical, for example, but if I'm playing fixed, then it doesn't really matter what happens after the shooting phase, because you more or less should understand. If you have a unit exposed, basically any army in the game is going to kill him. So if you have army units that are not exposed, they're not going to die, so you're going to have them to be used. At the end of your opponent's fighting phase, you already know exactly what you need to accomplish next turn. And once again, unless your secondary draws will confuse that at all. So I spend during my opponent's shooting and fight phase, that's when I plan my entire movement phase out, which means I need to spend approximately 0 time thinking about what I do in my movement phase. It's already been completely planned out for me. When you don't, you'd be shocked how much time you waste on the clock just sitting there thinking, being like, should I go up here? Should I go up here? Well, guys, that can easily take 10, 15, 20. If you pause the clock to think for 30 seconds every round, that adds up to a ton. So just don't do it. Do all of your plans while on your opponent's clock. That way, you don't have to worry about it. All right. Lastly, or almost lastly, just memorize your freaking data sheets. I know it's a lot, but in all reality, your army, the bulk of it, it's going to be like 5 data sheets. Some might have like 6 or 7 data sheets that are important. Some armies might have less, right? So if I play orcs, the data sheets I need to know is I need to know what squig hogs do. I need to know what knobs do. I need to know what flash kits do. I need to know what boys do. And I basically need to know what Mozrog does. That's 5 data sheets right there. Okay, you can expand your knowledge out. The better you get at this trick is you can start memorizing your Def Copters and your Battle Wagon and all these things. But you know what? If you only have one Battle Wagon and you're only going to strike with it in melee once in the game, you can spend the 15 seconds to look that one up. What you don't need to be looking it up is every time you want to activate your knobs. Don't look that up. Just memorize what a Power Claw is. Don't look up what a Choppa is. Just memorize what a Choppa is. Do you understand what I'm saying? So this applies to every army in the game, whether you're playing Space Marines, CSM, Eldar. Well, you shouldn't play Eldar because they're tricksy elves and everyone hates tricksy elves. But regardless of what army you're playing, just memorize the 5-ish data sheets that really important. And you can look up the niche ones, but you should never have to look up your core data sheets. It's just a bad idea. Same thing with your stratagems, by the way. If you're playing your army, you should know what your stratagems are. Just like pre-game, spend 10 minutes and memorize it. If it takes you longer to memorize, do it the night before. If it takes you longer than that, then every single night before, you go to bed, spend 3 minutes looking at your stratagems and just commit them to memory. There's lots of little tricks of like memory tricks. Maybe I can do a video on memory hacks as well, but that's not really like 40K exclusive. I might do that on my second channel where I go through health advice. But anyway, just memorize those darn data sheets. It's going to speed up your play dramatically. And then lastly, and this one is actually really important, and some people might think that this is dumb, but they're wrong. They're dumb. Actually, you should always ask your opponents for help. So you need to declare your intentions of what you're doing. So if I am deep striking a unit of Storm Boys, for example, what I'm going to say to my opponent is say, hey, I am going to deep strike my Storm Boys here, which is just an arbitrary point on the map. But I want to make sure there's no way that you're going to be able to draw a line of sight to me. Do you agree that I have accomplished this? So I'm going to be like checking line of sights. I'm going to be looking at his models, but I'm not going to spend an hour asking him every single movement, every single range for all of his models. I'm going to say, hey, do you have any models that will actually be able to get in the position to shoot me next turn? And your opponent's going to then, if they're a good opponent, will look at the battlefield and say, yeah, actually, so this guy, because I have assault weapons on them, I'll be able to advance here and get line of sight. At that point, you get to say, okay, cool, thank you. And then you get to rotate your model or put them in the position that you need to put them in. Now, all the time that's happening, the clock is on you, but it will dramatically speed up the play when you just ask for your opponent to help you out. Remember, this game is a 2-player game. It's 2 people playing the game together. Even though I am trying to beat you, and if you ever play a game with me, you know I'm very competitive. I am trying to win. I'm also 100% playing the game with you. I'm trying to make sure that you accomplish what you want to accomplish, and I'm trying to beat you strategically, not because I got you from any knowledge, and none of your opponents should be doing the same. If you play against really like 99% of the people at competitive play, everyone's always going to be doing everything they can to empower each other, even though we're trying to beat each other strategically. So these are my thoughts, guys. Just to really quickly sum it all up. for how to do everything. Realistically, you want to start your game with a game plan for how you're going to win. You want to deploy to accomplish the game plan every single turn. Identify what you need to do in order to accomplish said game plan. Anytime you take an action, ask yourself, how does it further my game plan? If it doesn't, don't. Get stacks of dice. I like to use stacks of 20 dice. It just makes it really easy for counting. Then ask your opponent for help and memorize your data sheets. That's what we got to do. You're going to be a much faster player. When I play with my buddy Sandra, we can get a 2,000 point game done in an hour and 15 minutes. Easily. It's kind of hilarious how quickly we play. I don't think everyone's going to be able to get that quick. We are pretty darn fast at the game. But we're not Ennis Wilson. If you guys have ever seen Ennis play, oh my gosh, that guy, I don't understand how he plays as fast as he does. But regardless, playing faster is going to take a lot of mental stress off of you, and it's going to help your opponents enjoy themselves a lot more, which will in turn make you enjoy the game a lot more as well. So until next time, all of my lovely grots and gets, this is Happy Company Wargaming, teaching you how to enjoy and do the game that you love significantly better every single time. Happy Crump and all. Bye-bye.